Yeah, like 2017 was my first release, and it's kind of weird because it coincides with the birth of my first kid. So like right after she was born, for some reason I had this like creative energy, and a little more confidence, honestly, in myself to like start releasing the music that I've been making for 5 or 6 years. So it's kind of nice that I can look back to when she was born, and her birthdays kind of represent like how long the project's been going.
Huh, that's rad. What can
Yeah.
you unpack that kind of the feeling of confidence or like whatever the mental shift was? Because you said you've been making music for like 5 or 6 years before that.
Yeah. So I think it's just like when you, and any parent in the chat will probably understand, but I think when you have a kid, you realize like what you're capable of, and you kind of get perspective on the fact that like nothing really matters. Like all this frivolous stuff that we worry about, like our self-confidence, or like if XYZ is going to work out, like all I cared about was that my like children were happy and that my marriage was good. And then so everything else kind of just became a little bit easier to just let go of a little bit and just let it go. Because I listened to my first track that came out, like Memory, and like anyone, obviously there's a lot that I would change now, but I like to look at it as like a timestamp of where I was at the time, and just having the confidence to put something out there and see what happens. And I never expected any of it to get listened to. So I feel really lucky that anyone has listened to it so far. So I just keep kind of going with that mentality and seeing where it goes.
That's awesome. And was it like the build? Was it, you know, people always talk about like, oh, you have a kid and then like suddenly everything changes. And, you know, I found when my kids were born, it was much more of like it was, I would say, more of a crossfade than like a, you know, massive hit on the downbeat. But
Yeah,
was
definitely
like built,
crossfade.
was that kind of shift in perspective? Did that happen just around that whole, the birth and around the pregnancy and everything? Or did you just like wake up one morning and go like, hang on?
Yeah. I think it was more slow because like she was born in November and that song came out in April. So if we're looking at like the crossfade mentality, that's like 5 or 6 months. I will say the weirdest thing about having a kid is like when you first meet them, you don't really like know them. So it takes time to. I thought I would like hold my daughter and be like, "Oh my gosh, like I know you," but I was kind of like this little stranger that took a little bit to get to know. So I think that's a better analogy. Like it took a couple months to like get it going. So
awesome. And with that release, did you like, was it a track that you had lying around and you just felt inspired to like get it done, or were you still making music through that time and through, you know, after her birth and everything?
That track specifically, I think the first two tracks came together the quickest. Mm-hmm. So I think I did start working on that after she was born.
Okay. Like they literally didn't exist before then? Like you started writing then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they didn't exist. Yeah.
Awesome.
And the project didn't really exist. I was just like messing around with sounds really, and kind of discovering like how to make the tracks myself. Because before that I had a project with a friend and we needed a lot of production help to get the two singles out because I didn't really know how I wanted to finish them. So yeah, I think that was more of like an exploratory time period where I was like, okay, this is what it's called and this is kind of the vibe that, you know, I want to portray.
Okay, great. Because I mean, what's rad with your music is it really has like a world to it and a very clear energy and aesthetic and everything going on. So are you kind of saying like that kind of like the aesthetic and the world and the universe that you wanted to build also like crystallized at that time after years of experimentation?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I always know like what influences it, but I wonder if when I had a kid, it kind of helped me connect to that younger self, because the project really is all about like this false sense of nostalgia that we have, and that's why the songs are like somewhat dreamy and like positive sounding, but a lot of the lyrical message is like somewhat sad at times. And I do sometimes have this false sense of nostalgia where I'll think about something really positive light, but then if I dive deeper on it, it was actually kind of a hard thing to go through. And I think when you have a child, you kind of look at them through this younger lens of life, and that's probably what helped shape the project, if I'm understanding it now.
Amazing. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I have to ask as well, just like having this like lovely juicy tidbit of like the whole process crystallizing after your daughter was born. Like, how did you manage what has been called the shock of lost adult freedom? Like, when you have a child, your entire life changes, your routines changes, your sleep goes out the window. So most people would probably imagine like, oh, the time to launch a new project would probably not have coincided with the birth of your first child.
Yeah, that's true. I guess the one thing that I'm not good at like long sprints of work when it comes to creativity. Like if I'm doing my job and I'm editing, I can do it till we need to get it done. But when it comes to like my personal outlets, like having a kid forced me to write in really short snippets, like sit down for 30 minutes to an hour and get something out and then get up and leave and go take care of stuff. And I feel like that's something I didn't know about myself before. I would just sit down before I had a child on a Saturday and try to spend 5 hours making a track, which is usually not fruitful for me. But then when I was more busy, it like gave me more focus to where I said, hey, I only have 90 minutes right now. I have to like get in the zone quickly and do what I can and then step away and come back and try to finish this idea later, basically.
I think that's brilliant. So you went and when you would sit down, did you have like a really clear sense of purpose? Like, I need to go in and get this done, even if it's like, I need to go sit down and write something, or I need to go in and like program some drums, or I need to, do you know what I mean? Like, did you have a clear agenda going into each of those sessions?
My good friend, Loudhound, who's another musician that I'm really good friends with, he's really calculated and good at all this stuff. He would laugh if I said yes, because he's trying to get me on like a calendar, right, where I like have my blocks. I'm no good at that, but what I will say is I bounce all my tracks after each session to a SoundCloud playlist, and then I listen to them throughout the next few days, and I'll take notes. So I do have notes.
Oh, right.
Where I'll say like, hey, I need to, bring down the snare and like adjust the timing a bit, and then the synth part's just not working, so I'll rewrite the whole part or something. But I do have this, I struggle with this thing where I'll make like 20 versions of a song, and then 6 months down the road, I'll go back and listen to like version 2 or 1 and be like, that's the song.
Right.
And so I feel like I wasted time, but really I don't think it's a waste because you're exploring. But I do have this like this paralysis of finishing where I'm scared that it's almost done. And so I'll try to overproduce the song and then I have to go back and cut it down.
Have you found that as you kind of like explored that whole process of going back to earlier versions, has that relaxed any tension around feeling like you need to work a certain amount or you need to put in a certain amount of effort for a song to be done? Like, do you look at stuff very differently now a few years into the project?
Totally. Yeah, I just actually had one of the songs on the EP, like I basically accidentally turned it into a new song. So now this song has become 2 different songs. And then I went back to the first version of the track and I was just like, man, I need to just stop looking at like time frames and be okay with a song starting 15 days ago and having it be done, ready for like mixing. And that was kind of a big breakthrough. It's funny you asked that question because I was like, I'm always stuck in this thing where I'm like, oh, I take really long to finish songs. But I wonder if that's just like me telling myself that a good song takes X amount of time to be considered a good song.
So when you say getting over time frames, like you felt you didn't have to put in that amount of time or whatever, or that wasn't like, that wasn't, okay, cool. So you're kind of, and do you feel like more connected with your instinct now when you're creating in a way, or just like able to just trust in your own process a bit more?
I think so. Like I'm still learning. And I think for anyone in the chat, like I'll be the first to say like, I'm not the most technical, like producer or songwriter. I'm just drawn to like certain palettes and tones and tools. But like I have so much to learn. You just kind of take it as you go.